Hey everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your oil filter housing gasket on your E90, E92, 335i. This also applies to E60s, any car with the N54 motor. So some of the symptoms you may have are coolant loss as well as oil loss if you have this oil filter housing gasket leaking. You'll also have a bunch of oil, coolant, and dirt mixture going all over the belts, pulleys, alternator, all over the front of the motor, and that's usually stemming from the oil filter housing gasket. If you have a newer N54, so 09 and up, you're also going to have an oil cooler attached, so there's a separate gasket for the oil cooler, and I would recommend doing both of those at the same time. In order to do this, you do have to remove the manifold. You don't have to remove it completely, but if you choose to remove it completely, make sure you have new intake manifold gaskets, and also it will be a good time to do a walnut blast cleaning on your intake valves. I'll try to make a separate video on that whenever I get to it. Once you have the cabin filter assembly and the strut bars removed, we can remove the airbox. In order to do that, you're going to want to remove the two clamps. There's one clamp right here, another clamp right here. Those are both 6mm clamps. You can also use the flathead. You're also going to want to remove this hose. This is for the booster vacuum hose. What you can do is just squeeze the two clips on the side. Squeeze the two clips on the side and pull up, and it'll come right out. So when you squeeze these, those two tabs pop out and let you pull it up. Put this to the side. Now the airbox is just held in with grommets, no other screws. So you want to push off the two hoses where the clamps were. Move this booster vacuum hose out of the way. Make sure there's nothing else there. And you're just going to lift up. It is going to take a little bit of pressure, so. Now we can pull that out. Now you can see there's a few more vacuum lines. I've already disconnected these since I was doing the valve cover gasket. But you just pull these off from that booster hose. There's two nipples there. So just pull off both vacuum lines and put those to the side. We're also going to need to remove this harness that goes for the O2 sensors. So pull the O2 sensor off. Push this tab. Do the same for the second one. You can lift those vacuum lines up and out of the groove. We can also disconnect the sensor from the oil filter housing. So we also need to remove this hose that goes to the throttle body. So there's a clamp down here. That's a 6mm head or a flathead. There's a T30 bolt that we also need to remove. And then you have to remove these pipes as well that come from the charge pipes. So in order to do that, there's a plastic clip. So this one we're going to turn clockwise to loosen. Same with this one. This will also be a good time to replace all of these vacuum lines. So if you can do that, go ahead and do that as well. So pull off this clip, just lift the clip up and loosen that hose clamp next. So this hose clamp is a 7mm. Remove this T30 bolt. You can lift this clip up with a pick or a flathead screwdriver. There's also a connector for a sensor right down here. And that just pulls right out. You don't have to press anything, you just pull it straight down. Now you want to start by removing it from this section. Make sure you have that clamp nice and loose. Then you can just pull it down from right here. remove this sensor off the top of the manifold. It also pulls out. If you have trouble pulling it out, you can lift up this tab very, very slightly. Now we'll be removing this manifold. We're not going to remove it all the way. We're just going to loosen all the bolts and nuts so we can lift it up and out, and that allows us to get access to the last bolt for this oil filter housing. So these are all size 11 bolts and nuts. We have all the bolts and nuts taken off the manifold. We're not going to pull it off just yet. Let's loosen the oil filter housing. That way all the oil that's in there will start draining to the bottom. You want to do this very slowly. You can see how some of the oil is trying to escape. Ideally, you would also want to remove the upper radiator hose, but since these hoses are a little fragile and it looks like someone's already messed with it before, I don't want to pull it off and break it because the customer does need the car back today. So we're just going to let that be. You would also want to remove this hose right here, which is held in with two 10mm bolts. But with this hose, the inside part is usually corroded into the housing. So when you go to pull it off, that inside part usually breaks off. If it doesn't, you still have to replace the O-ring, so make sure you have that with you before you start this project. Besides that, you're going to have 3 bolts for the whole housing to remove. One on the bottom, one on the top, and another one on this corner, which is underneath the manifold, which is why we're pulling the whole manifold off. If you have a newer N54, you're going to also have an oil cooler up here. If you do have the oil cooler, that's an extra step. There's a 13mm bolt on the bottom of the oil cooler pipes. You'll have to remove that 13mm bolt, remove the pipes, make sure you have new O-rings for both of those pipes, put the pipes on the side, and then you'll have access to another bolt on the bottom. With that being said, we've pulled off this sensor, the manifold's ready to lift up. We're not going to pull it out all of the way because we still have the throttle body and we still have some of these wires connected to it. So we're just going to lift it just enough so that way we can move it and get access to that bolt. So at this point we have access to the bolt. Make sure there's no dirt or anything that can fall into the cylinders from up here, and then we can remove this bolt. This bolt is a 10mm E-Torx, same with this one and same with that one. You're also going to have a little bit of spillage from the bottom, so if you can, put a microfiber or something so it doesn't get on the belt and pulleys. But chances are, if your oil filter housing is leaking, you already have a bunch of that grime on the belts and pulleys. Now that we have access to that 10mm bolt, it's an external 10 E-Torx, so go ahead and pull that off. We're just going to loosen it. With that being loose, go ahead and remove the oil filter cap. Oh wow, so we're actually missing the middle section that snaps into the cap. That's actually very crucial. So that part snaps in and then it goes into the middle. There's an O-ring that you usually replace. So the filter is actually supposed to be on top of there and it's supposed to be a press fit. Usually when you go to places to get oil changes that are not familiar with these cars, they'll pull the filter off and that part will usually snap off with it and they'll forget to take it off and put on the new filter. So that is crucial. That is something that you absolutely need to have. With the filter pulled off, we'll continue to remove these bolts. Now the last bolt is right down here. So this is also an E10, and like I said, if you remove this hose, it makes it a lot easier to get to. But if you can't, just get a smaller socket that you can use to try to loosen it and pull it off. Another trick is you can use an 8mm wrench or 8mm 12-point socket, but you just gotta be very careful with that because sometimes that will strip it since it's not the exact right one. Just be careful if you do go with that method. With the final bolt out, you can remove the housing. There's the old gasket. Once you have the mating surfaces cleaned up, we can put on the new gasket. We'll start out with the lowermost bolt. The top bolt is the longest of them all. That bottom lower one is the shortest. And the one that's underneath the manifold is the one in the middle. Make sure you start threading all three of them before you get one completely tight. Then once all of them are threaded, then you start tying them down one at a time. With all the bolts tightened, clean up the area as much as you can. I'm just going to put the oil filter cap back on without the filter in it. I need to tell the customer about that, and hopefully we can source one of those soon. And this is just so you don't get any more dirt or anything in there. With that closed up, we can put the manifold back together. Put all the bolts and nuts back on. Once again, these are all 11 millimeter. There should be one bolt and the rest are all nuts. Should be 6 nuts. We can reroute the vacuum lines. Hook them back up where they belong. Hook this connector back up as well. Get the O2 sensor connectors rerouted. If you're replacing these vacuum lines, now would be a good time. There's one port that goes to the manifold and the 2 that go to each one of these pipes. If you need help putting the vacuum lines back in, use some silicone spray. And if you need help taking them off, use a razor blade. Cut a slit at the very edge where it attaches to the nipple, and that'll allow you to pull it off without breaking the nipple itself. But once you have those vacuum lines replaced, let's start hooking the connectors back up. So first things first, it's going to be on the top of the manifold. Push it in. Double check all of the connectors for a throttle body and stuff if you didn't remove those, just in case if they were put stress on and they became unclipped. All that's fine. We have one more connector that goes to the intake hose. So grab the hose, let's reroute where it needs to go. You can put it on the intercooler side first. Slide it on, clip it in place. Make sure that this is on top of that bracket. Once again, that is a T30 bolt. You can also slide these back in. Once it's slid in all the way, you have to turn it counterclockwise to lock. You can stop turning once it bottoms out. That's when you know it's clicked in place. Don't forget to plug in the connector on the bottom of the hose. It'll slide right in and you should hear an audible click. With all that done, double check, make sure everything's plugged in, make sure all the hoses and wires are in the right spots, and then we can put the airbox back on. As far as the airbox goes, you want to slide in the hoses first from the pipes. So to get it set up where you want it, you can start out with the back one first. And these do have a little bit of flex to them, so you should be able to get it on. And then all you have to do is make sure that the box is sitting on those little dowels that were hanging out of the manifold, and then just push everything in place. This hose clips in on the manifold right here. And then you just push it in right here, and you'll hear both of those ends click in. Now all you have left is to tighten all the clamps down. So the one that goes to the intercooler pipe is a 7mm clamp. These are 6mm clamps, one on each side of the airbox. Now on the side of the airbox, you have these wires, harnesses, and they have rubber grommets that should slide right in. There should be a total of 3 of them. And they all go in order. Alright, all 3 are in. All that is left is to put the covers back on. So in order to put the strut bars back in, you want to slide it. Make sure it goes underneath the bolt. There is a washer that you can hold up. You should have a cap here. If you do, go ahead and put it back on. If you're watching this from the beginning, in the beginning we were using a different car, but I already had to finish that car, so this is a completely different one, which is why it has different bolts, doesn't have the cap, and it's missing a few things. I usually show how to reassemble all this the way it came out, but since it is on a different car, there's a few different things, there's a couple of variations. But that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, make sure you leave a comment down below or message me on Instagram at ShopLifeTV to get in touch with me a lot quicker. And thanks for watching.